Neglected by my father in favor of my golden child younger brother, I finally opened my own restaurant after many years. When I launched the restaurant, my distant father and brother suddenly wanted to be a part of my life. Growing up, I was very much a mama's boy since I was always more into things that are associated with femininity. I enjoyed reading, singing, and doing anything involving the kitchen. I was terrible at football when my dad tried to force me to play with him, thus we progressively drifted apart. In contrast, my brother was the exact son my father had hoped for. He was a rough and tumble youngster who didn't mind being harmed or dirty when playing. It was clear that he loved my brother far more than he loved me. Even though he was my dad's ideal son, he would always compliment my brother, but never me. I liked my mother even more since she was fair to both of us and never showed favoritism. I did try to spend time and make friends with my dad, but after we had grown apart, he didn't seem to be interested in mending our connection either. Sadly, the glue that keeps our dysfunctional family together was in the 6th grade when my mother passed away. It was too late to save her when we discovered that she had been afflicted with cancer, and before we knew it, she was gone. After my mother passed away, I was completely crushed and went into a spiral. The kitchen provided me with the little comfort I had, and I would cook something fresh every day as if my life depended on it. My mother was an excellent chef, and she frequently told me that if she hadn't been pressured to take over her father's company, she probably would have gone into the culinary arts. My brother and father didn't know how to help me deal with my emotions, so cooking was the only thing that made me feel better. They buried whatever feelings of grief they may have felt over my mother's death. If anything, this would have made them feel closer to me than they would have if we had been in typical families. My father became angrier at my obsession with cooking, and he would constantly nag me to get out of the darn kitchen and do something more macho. When Dad finally had enough, he even threatened to have me perform all the other home chores if he ever spotted me in the kitchen. I told him he never loved me, and he agreed, leading to a heated argument where he encouraged me to man up and be more like my brother. I suppose that was the last day that my father and I spoke to each other. So honestly, since it was now out in the open because he didn't appear to care about it either, I stopped attempting to win him over completely. After that, I listened to music and studied new recipes in my room all the time. For the following few years, I had vowed to see this chef thing through, not just for my mother, but for myself as well. In the meantime, I only talked to my dad when it was absolutely essential. Like our father, my brother showed little regard for me and disregarded me. My mom died and I was left with no one to really rely on. When it came time for me to submit college applications, I made the decision to apply to both regular colleges and a few of the best culinary schools just to give myself the best chance possible. I had to try, even though I wasn't sure if my dad would agree to it. If nothing else, I had already worked as a covert intern at a restaurant that summer, gained some experience, and convinced them to write a recommendation letter for me, which would be really helpful. I was thus admitted to a number of the schools I had applied to, including one of the top, which coincidentally was located in France. Though I was excited that I would finally be able to do this, I was also anxious because I would need to ask my dad for permission. I had previously decided that if he appeared hesitant, I would ask him to let me go since I had to do this for myself. At some point, I did tell my father about it since I wasn't ready to give up on my aspirations. I was prepared for him to claim that it wasn't a manly career and deny my demands, but I was not at all prepared for him to announce that he wouldn't pay for my tuition. It still seems strange to me that he told me he wouldn't be covering any portion of my schooling given that my dad wasn't in the least bit impoverished. He was actually fairly well off and could have easily paid to transfer me to France, but he wasn't at all prepared to pay for my tuition because of money. It was the fear that my younger brother would get insecure if I moved to France and enrolled in such a prestigious school as it was. He was having trouble focusing and was having trouble with his academics. My father therefore desired that I find a means to pay for my own tuition or attend a community college. I didn't know how to respond to him since I was shocked that he would treat his own son so cruelly. I attempted to explain to him how much I needed this, but Dad was adamant and would not pay my tuition at all. He went so far as to say that his son's welfare was his first concern and that he didn't want me to compete with him. I could barely fathom any other father in the world shattering his child's ambitions in this way for their own benefit. Therefore, I found it hard to accept that this was actually happening. I begged and cried a lot, but he wouldn't go, so I got into a heated argument with him and told him a lot of things before permanently leaving his house. Instead, I moved in with my maternal aunt, who is the older sister of my mother. I had grown up in this house with my mom, so the main reasons I hadn't moved out sooner were that I felt comfortable there, and I didn't want to go to a new school if I moved in with my aunt, considering that she resided rather far from the high school I attended. I told her everything, including how my dad would flatly refuse to cover my tuition and that I was in need of her assistance. She wasn't as wealthy as my dad, so it seemed bad to ask her for so much money, but she told me that she would cover all of my costs. She somehow persuaded all of her friends to help, and I was sent to the culinary program of my dreams. I will always be appreciative of that. Once I was there, I worked a part-time job as well, trying to maximize my earnings to cover all of my expenses. Everything was worthwhile. I put in a ton of work and worked my way up. I was one of the most talented chefs there when I finished, and I even got hired a few months later. I started working in a fancy French restaurant and used to give my aunt back half of my pay to settle any obligations I had. I was merely fortunate not to have to rely on a student loan. Slowly but progressively, or perhaps I wouldn't be able to make any of the payments. In any case, I spent a few years working in France before returning home when I had enough money saved up to start my own eatery. It's been a few years, and throughout that time, I worked as the head chef at another restaurant here and pursued my dream of one day owning my own eatery. After everything was settled a few weeks ago, I was able to open the restaurant I had been aiming for a very long time. I was happy to be given the opportunity to choose the restaurant's name because two of my old friends from my time in France co-owned the business with me and supported my business plan. Since they all came from the same state, it was okay for us to open our restaurant in my preferred city. It was a very fortunate coincidence for us that I named it after my mother because she has a very lovely and unusual name in the city no less we'd called home. Everything was at last starting to make sense. We also had a small celebration a few days ago for a few special visitors before we opened for business. Naturally, I extended an invitation to my aunt and a couple of her friends who had also contributed to my tuition. I asked a few of my school pals back as well, but that was about it. For obvious reasons, my brother and father were not invited. I hadn't spoken to them since I left home, and they hadn't bothered to get in touch with me again. So even if I had wanted to, I couldn't have. We were all better off this way, I suppose. But I should have known that eventually they would arrive to capitalize on my accomplishment, and at the party we hosted, that's precisely what took place. An hour before the party was scheduled to start, they arrived, but security let them through given that our last names are the same, and they said they came to surprise me. That much was true, at least. To be sure, I was taken aback when I saw them. My brother and father welcomed me as if nothing bad had ever occurred to them before, and they were very kind to me. It probably stunned me to see them for the first time in my life. Thus, when they first walked into the restaurant, I basically froze. I'm grateful that my friends were able to sense that I wasn't feeling well and left us alone after extending a kind hello to my family. By the time they dropped another bomb on me and showed me the gift they brought for me, I still hadn't fully recovered from the shock of seeing them again. My father even told me that he had commissioned a portrait of my mother to be hung in my restaurant. He knew right away that it was none other than his son when he learned that a nice new restaurant bearing this name was starting up in our city. He even told me that he'd always known I had it in me. My brother was also joining the bandwagon, complimenting me and expressing his utter pride in me. I was astounded by what I was hearing and realized right away that there was something incredibly off about everything. I knew there had to be a reason they were there, so I remained silent and patiently waited for them to get to the point. After I gave them space to talk, they gradually revealed their motivation for being there. It seems that my brother had found employment as a bartender, and that too was made possible by my dad's ability to persuade a friend to provide him a position at his club. My brother didn't land the high-paying job since his grades continued to decline throughout high school and college, and my father had consistently anticipated from him. Furthermore, he had been underperforming in his high school football games, which prevented him from receiving a sports scholarship. Ironically, he was the one who was turned down for admission everywhere else, forcing him to attend community college. Even though my brother had done nothing at all to merit it, they wanted me to add him as a partner in the company so that he would have a more prestigious position. I wanted to laugh in their faces, but I forced myself to resist and assured them I'd give it some thought. But I wasn't going to give it any thought. All I wanted to do was not turn them away. I wanted them to stay for the celebration because I had a much better idea on how to embarrass my family, who would emerge from hiding as soon as they learned of my accomplishment. They appeared to be quite happy, but they were completely aware of what was going to happen. Our visitors began to show up after a time, and within an hour or two, everyone who had been invited was present. I went out and socialized all evening with my dad and brother, and I was amazed at their utter boldness when I heard them brag about me to a few people. It was time for the hosts, that is, my partners and I, to make a toast at the end of the celebration. Because I wanted to save the best for last, my friends went first. At last, I had the opportunity to speak, and I was going to talk for the first time that day with all of my heart. I began by extending my gratitude to each and every one of my visitors and lifted the glass to my mother, who was the reason I had ever been able to accomplish so much. I really think that my belief that I could do anything at all as a child came from her faith in me, and that belief persisted in me long after she passed away. I made the decision to confront the disrespect as well. After I had made my respects, I mentioned that in order to go to culinary school, I had to borrow money from my aunt and her friends, and I also thanked her. Finally, I understood why I had to take out a loan in the first place to pay for my tuition. I mentioned how my father had never shown me love or faith and had always chastised me for having a younger brother who was just like my dad and for having feminine hobbies like cooking. I told them all about how my father had refused to pay for my college education because he was afraid I would surpass my younger brother, who was his only kid, in achievement, which is why I had to leave home. But I overcame all obstacles and emerged as the person I am today. Thus, to a certain extent, they were to blame for all the difficulties I've encountered. Otherwise, I would have never discovered my level of resilience. Many individuals gave my brother and dad the ugliest stares they could muster. Even though I knew they didn't feel the least bit ashamed, they had the common sense to at least look embarrassed while I was saying all of this. That being said, I went to embrace my brother and dad after that, maintaining the same facade as when they came to see me today to participate at that game. I declared that I had forgiven them for everything that had happened in the past and that I was even prepared to offer my brother the position of bartender at my restaurant because they had come to celebrate my victory today. Others clearly saw this as a very moving reconciliation, as seen by their applause for me as I finished speaking. There were also a few wolf whistles since they couldn't simply storm out in an angry manner, which is exactly what they wanted to do. They had to grin and look like they were very appreciative for what I'd done. Only my family and I knew that this was nothing more than an attempt to embarrass them, which I'd done rather successfully. When the throng eventually dispersed and it was time for us to head home, my brother and father accosted me in front of my business. My brother's eyes were filled with tears of anger. They were so angry they insisted on an explanation for my actions, and I should have simply turned them away as soon as they showed up. If I had never planned to make my brother a partner, I just smiled and told them that this was exactly what they deserved, and that it was my way of giving them back for everything that they had done to me over the years. Then, even after hearing my brother sob and say that this was the cruelest thing I could have done, he yelled at me to apologize for what I had done. As I was already in my car and heading off, I last heard from them a few days ago, and since then, nothing. I disagree with my aunt, who believes that I may have gone too far with this and should have simply kicked them out right away. This was truly merited. I am sorry for making fun of my brother and father. First update, despite what my aunt stated about me being way too harsh, I choose not to apologize to my family. I won't pretend to feel guilty for what I did and make a special effort to convey that I do. When they came to see me, they had the chance to apologize, but they chose not to. My aunt was also given this explanation, which is why she still thinks I shouldn't have done what I did. She hasn't discussed it much. We just have to agree to disagree on some things, I suppose, and that's okay. In other news, my brother has made sure to trash talk me to all of our school-age buddies behind my back. We attended the same high school, which is regrettable since it means that random folks there are now texting to verify the reports that I embarrassed my dad and brother, booted them out of my business, and fed them intentionally 3-day-old food. It is hardly surprising that he embellished the story to make himself appear to be the victim. Small-scale rumors wouldn't normally concern me, but I don't want prospective clients to take them seriously. I've texted my brother to let him know that I'll make sure he loses his current job as well if he doesn't stop spreading false information about me and my restaurants. I sincerely don't feel like dealing with their needless drama right now, so I'm hoping it works. This isn't the right time. I'm too busy with work. Hello, update 2. My brother responded to my SMS by stating that he would only stop if I made him a partner. What a degree of ignorance and illusion this is. I cannot even begin to imagine. Furthermore, isn't it a fairly dumb idea for him to be trash-talking about the same establishment if he wants to be a partner? This is probably my dad's strategy to make sure his adorable son gets a big job without actually working hard, but it won't work with me. I've informed him that he is in no position to be negotiating with me at this time and that he will hear from my lawyers if he doesn't stop. I haven't taken any action yet, mainly because I don't want to get involved in needless drama, but if he tries anything funny after this, I'll absolutely screw him up. This is the last warning I'm giving him. I sincerely hope he does so for self-interest. Update 3. Hey everyone, it's been about a month since my previous post, and I apologize for the lack of updates. I've been unable to update you all on what transpired following that. Although my brother had stopped slandering me behind my back, they were still very eager to benefit from my success. In an attempt to scare me, my dad chose a few weeks ago to pay me a visit with my brother. When they arrived at my residence, they threatened to sue me for naming my business after my mother and even mentioned that they had already contacted an attorney. Thus, I had to take my brother as a partner as soon as possible if I wanted to avoid any problems. Naturally, I called the bluff right away because no attorney would embark on a case this ridiculous. I believe they were overlooking the crucial aspect that she was also my mother, not to mention his spouse. Furthermore, I didn't think the law could prevent me from using her name. I had had enough of their nonsense by then. I threatened to contact the police if they didn't leave me alone, as I felt like they were forcing my hand at that moment. My brother lost his cool and attempted to grab me by the collar, but fortunately, my dad stopped him. I believe that he finally lost it and lost his cool due to the ongoing humiliation. All right, I wasn't at fault, and I was fortunate not to have called the police at that same moment. I told my dad he had to get the hell out of there, but all he said was to let my brother cool off in the car and that he wanted to talk to me alone. My brother attempted to control me after he left by saying that I should put this behind me and that my mother would be furious with me if she knew what I was doing to them. I informed him that even I had reached my breaking point and that he should shut up. He was not going to be able to use my mother as a prop. That was so depressing, honestly. We had already gone past the stage of reconciliation, and neither of them had ever shown regret to me. Therefore, I found it really puzzling that they expected me to forgive them without even making a request. I have no doubt that my mother would have been just as disappointed. He made me feel bad about myself back when my father had refused to pay for my tuition, and, for that matter, every single time. Thus, he ought to be the last to lecture me about what my mother would and wouldn't approve of. No matter what my dad says, I know that my mother is proud of me wherever she is. At least business is good at my restaurant, and perhaps we can grow sooner rather than later.